Good morning. Welcome to our second, not necessarily ready for prime time or prime time, I'm never sure which one to use. This is a collaboration between the library, Bethel Faculty Development, and Friends of the Library, and I'd like to express appreciation to both of those other groups, and also let the students here know that the Friends of the Library are also sponsoring a research project student of the year. So if you were working on a project, Student Library Research Prize, $250. And then you also get to do one of these presentations next spring. So there's more information on the library page. We have two of our colleagues from the theater department, Rees and Zauner, here this morning. They are both directors and have a great deal of experience both here and elsewhere. Rick works in the technical area, stage design, costume design, light design, and directing in children's theater, and has designed for theaters throughout the community. And Meg is also a director, works in the area of Shakespeare, musical theater, theater history, dance, and children's theater. Most of our faculty doing research are doing either a presentation for a conference, or a paper, or an article, or a book. But when our theater colleagues do research, what they end up bringing it into is the work that they produce in the theater. So they're going to show us how they've taken research on 17th century theater and brought that to us on the stage. So welcome, Rick and Megan. Thank you.
I feel a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir here. That's all right. In our department meetings, we frequently talk about our research that we're doing in connection with plays that we're eventually going to direct or work on. But we don't have a lot of opportunity outside of the media cast to present that research to people, to let them know what we're discovering about the time period, about the political situations, social and historical situations for the plays that we're doing. And so we thought, as we were talking about this, and talking also about a way to maybe market our plays to the larger Bethel community, if we could maybe present some of that, talk about why research is important to us, talk about how that impacts the plays that we're working on. We thought that might be a really good idea, and we thought perhaps this is the place to do it. So hopefully we might make this a tradition of the theater department before our plays open, instead of doing post-show discussions, which we found have been sort of uneven. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Maybe a pre-show discussion of the play to get people more interested in what's happening. We don't approach our plays from the perspective that, oh, this will be a fun show to watch. Okay, this will entertain our audiences. We approach the shows from what can we as a community learn about the human condition, about life, about God's relationship to us, and about how we are constantly, in many cases, failing God in our existence. So this is maybe a good opportunity for us to address some of the reasons that we've chosen to play, and some of the reasons that we want you to come and see it and experience the productions that we do. I had an experience that I think kind of illustrates why research isn't really important to us. I was doing a fitting on one of the characters the other day, and she had brought some friends with her to watch the fitting take place, and I didn't really mind that. Other than the fact that once she was dressed in her costume, they were commenting about how cute she looked. And this, that doesn't really bother me, other than the fact that I'm not designing costumes or creating costumes to make people look cute. The costumes that I'm creating should reflect the character. And many times the character simply is not cute. Okay, so by telling me they look cute, or telling me they look good in their costume, that may or may not be what I'm attempting to do. I'm trying with the costume to create a sense of historical accuracy, to help transport the audience to another time in history. I'm trying with the costume to reflect something of the socioeconomic class of the character, something about their attitude, something maybe about their health, something about their class in society, something about what they do for a living, how the world has impacted them through their costume. And so for a while I was okay with some of their comments, but at some point I had to put a bonnet on this character. And I wasn't sure how they were going to react to the bonnet, okay? They might have thought it was cute too, but they could have said something like, oh, that looks really stupid on you, or some other comment that wouldn't be helpful to either me, fitting the costume, or to the character who's playing, the actor's playing the character. So I asked them to leave. And because I was busy, I didn't go into my reason for asking them to leave, and I feel bad about that. But I was trying to do a fitting. I was trying to figure out how long the skirt needed to be, how tight everything needed to be, and how to make adjustments with the costume. So I asked them to leave because I didn't want to hear the comments they would have pertaining to the bonnet. Plus, I didn't want to make the actress feel insecure about how she looked on stage if they didn't like what she was wearing. So, I'm trying to give the actress an extra prop in which to play her character, okay? The costume should assist her in portraying that character. So whether it was cute or not was irrelevant. And whether they liked the bonnet was irrelevant, okay? So I think those kinds of things are important to keep in mind when you're watching a show, that what you see on stage is very intentionally placed there, okay? And it's for the benefit of the audience and for the director and actors to communicate something significant about this play other than, aren't these people attractive or pretty? I have two characters in my play that are young lovers, and typically those are characters that people think of, oh, they're going to be looking real pretty on stage, they'll look really nice, and he'll be very handsome and she'll be very beautiful. Well, I don't think in my play by Moliere he's actually saying that about these characters. He is basically satirizing them as much as he satirizes anybody in the play. Okay, he's calling our attention to their shallowness. He's calling our attention to their frivolity. And in the period of Louis XIV, in which my play takes, there was some really lavish, ridiculous costumes going on. Okay, so I think to try to create a sense of that ridiculousness, that foppishness that was going on during the period is much more important to communicate to the audience than aren't these beautiful people. Because first of all, I don't want you looking at these characters and saying, I want to be like that character, I want to be like him. That would go against the purpose of the play. Okay, so just that kind of gives you a sense of why our research is important to the play. Okay, I'm going to read something that will hopefully help us understand what we do in the theater arts and why we do it. Okay, giving you some background, some foundational material, so that when Megan presents her piece on the clearing, you'll kind of understand where this is all coming from and why it's important. We'll take a drink of water here. One of the ways in which scholarship is demonstrated in the theater arts is through the production of a play performed on stage. Research into the history surrounding the play is essential for understanding the play in the time period in which it is written, or the time period of the playwright, and the time period for the action of the play. These may be the same period or they may be different. This month, Bethel's Theater Arts Department will be performing two plays set in the mid-17th century. The Imaginary Invalid by French playwright Moliere was presumably set and written around 1673. This date is supported by historical records which indicate that Moliere died that year, and his death occurred following the fourth performance of the play when he was performing the title role of Argonne. Reports indicate that the playwright became seriously ill on stage and died that night. On the other hand, Helen Edmondson's The Clearing, published in 1994, is set in 1652 and concerns historical events from that time period, which are essential to understand when determining the visual context of the production. So we have one play that's written in the mid-17th century and one play that's written in 1990s, but talking about events that occurred in that same time period. While recognizing that one has options for determining a production design, all decisions must be derived from a thorough study of the play script. Play analysis occupies a great deal of prep time for a director. An examination of the play structure, how the action unfolds, identification of units of action, and definition of the purpose of each action unit are part of this analysis. Character analysis plays a role in this study as well. What the playwright says about the character, either in parentheses or through the character's behavior, what the character states about him or herself, and what others in the play say about the character assist in defining the character. The director will continue their research by reading any dramatic criticism or commentaries available, both historical and contemporary pertaining to the script. Play reviews from previous productions may be helpful. Depending on the era, a lexicon, dictionary, photographs and paintings, magazines from the period, and even an encyclopedia can be useful source material for aiding research. Options for determining or creating an environment for any play fall generally into 4 categories. The director-designer may choose to set the play in the period in which it was written or first produced. For example, we frequently, not frequently, but traditionally would set Shakespeare in the Elizabethan period because that's a time period in which it was written. It might seem not quite right for plays like Julius Caesar or Antony and Cleopatra, but originally that was a time period in which they were costumed. The whole concept of historical accuracy didn't come about until the 19th century. The Duke of Saxe-Meiningen in Germany, actually it was Prussia at that time, is credited for producing plays that were historically accurate in terms of the detail. He actually divided up centuries into 3 parts. And then he also was aware of national differences in terms of where the play was located, countries and stuff. One may also choose to set the play in the appropriate historical period within the action or events of the play. As I said before, Antony and Cleopatra is set in 40 BC rather than 1607 when the first production was staged. While this may seem an obvious choice, not until the 19th century was there a push towards historical accuracy in costumes and scenery. The third option provides the director and designers opportunity to investigate other periods in history when themes from the play are once again relevant to a culture or society where issues or lifestyles parallel the action and characters in the play. Updating of the play may be an attempt to address the universality of the themes within the play. Setting Twelfth Night in the Roaring Twenties could provide a means of connecting the audience to a more accessible and recognizable environment. It's not so far away that it seems kind of foreign and strange, but it kind of updates the play and helps the audience connect with it because they begin to understand something of the era in which the play is being produced. It means the audience may ask questions such as, how does this story play out when placed in a more contemporary area? And what are the parallels between the action and characters when set in the 1920s, the action and characters in their original intended time period? These types of questions stimulate the imagination of both the artists and the audience. And a final option for production design is a created environment. The story may lend itself to a more imaginary or fantastical context outside of reality or history. It may be an amalgamation or blending of historical details, exaggeration or distortion of historical style, or a fantastical, not of any specific time, may be the direction needed for connecting the audience with the whimsy or absurdity of the play. With The Merry Wives of Windsor, we chose to combine costume and prop pieces from both the 16th century and the 20th century. We used the 20th century pieces to symbolize more specific character qualities that would immediately identify the characters and enhance the farcical effect of the play. Even with the Tempest, we kind of created a style based sort of generally on some of the things that were going on at the time of the Renaissance, the Elizabethan period, those things, but it never got very specific with those things. But they were costumes that helped us understand the characters in a different kind of way. And again, with Shakespeare, because the themes are so universal, this works really well. Setting both our plays in the mid-17th century gives us an opportunity to compare and contrast. Simply by reading the plays, one discovers initially that The Clearing is an historical drama examining relationships caught up in a brutal conflict that leads to tragic outcomes. The Imaginary Invalid is a comic satire where characters are boldly drawn and the follies of the upper class are ridiculed. The Clearing takes place in Ireland, although the characters are both English and Irish. The Imaginary Invalid is intended to take place in France during the reign of the foppish Louis XIV. For English-speaking audiences, this play has been translated and adapted from the original French version numerous times. The adaptation we're using is by Miles Mallison, but there's a version by John Woods that is well respected and used in the literary circles, I think, frequently when reading the play. And a new one by Constance Congdon, and this may be an unfamiliar name to many of you, but she wrote The Tales of the Last Formica, which is a recent off-Broadway play, kind of edgy play. This play has recently received some acclaim. They've done it in Seattle at the Seattle Rep and some other regional theaters across the country. Unfortunately, it's unpublished, and so I was unable to get a copy of the script. A great resource for European costume design is Lucy Bart's text, Historic Costume for the Stage. And I mention this not only because she provides information and illustrations on period fashion, but she has, the book was written, I think, in the mid-50s, and has become kind of a standard, a way to really look at different eras, and she gives titles to those eras. The period that we're working on from 1625 to 1660 is identified as Charles I and Commonwealth, in reference to the period in which Charles I reigned in England, and following Charles' beheading, the subsequent leadership of Oliver Cromwell. In France, Louis XIII ruled and was followed by Louis XIV. At the beginning of each chapter, Barton lists political figures as well as painters, dramatists, and events occurring during this time period, so that it gives you, as a researcher, a basis, a foundation for exploring on your own in different directions. So for me, it's very helpful during this period to find out who are some of the artists that were painting portraiture. Most of the portraiture you're going to get from this time period has to do with leadership, people in leadership positions, royalty. It's people of title, dukes, ladies, things like that, rather than what we need for declaring the kind of middle class, lower middle class images. But it's a way to get started. So with this in mind, let us consider the productions that we have set for performance later this month.
Grab the mic, even though I can project. If I start doing this, just stop me, okay? Hi, I'm Meg. I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about The Clearing. The Clearing is a historical drama, and I might repeat some of the stuff that Rick said, but that's always a good thing. So, the thing that we can, when we're looking at research, is to look at the play itself. Our primary resource when we start is the script. Okay, so we're going to look at the script, and mine is a fiction. Okay, but it is set in a historical period, and within that context. And so, in order to do justice to the script, to the what's happening in history, I need to have a really clear idea of what's going on. So that's my first thing. So it's set during the reign of Cromwell in Ireland, basically from 1652 to 1654. So I start with the play. In this particular one, Helen Edmondson, who's the author, has a little historical note, which is helpful for my actors. It's helpful for me. And in fact, by looking at the historical note, I went, I need to look at that author. And then I got his whole book about the Cromwellian colonization of Ireland, 1652 to 1660. But that's the first place to start. So I'm just going to read just a tiny little bit of this, but I'm going to put my glasses on so I can actually see what it says. Okay. The Clearing is a play based on grim fact. Ever since the 12th century, England has made frequent attempts to conquer and rule Ireland. The Clearing is set against the implementation of England's most vicious design to solve its Irish question by the eradication of the entire Irish race. By 1652, when this play opens, the Irish nation has been ruthlessly reconquered by the merciless military machine of Oliver Cromwell. The Irish armies had fought hard to defend their parliament at Kilkenny, but now the last of them had been forced to surrender, and the surviving 40,000 young Irish soldiers and their officers were forced to transport themselves to Europe to seek service in Irish brigades in such countries as France and England. Within a few more years, the English administration in Ireland had calculated that its soldiers had arbitrarily seized and carried off some 100,000 English men, women, and children. The final enactment of the genocide against the Irish took place in the House of Commons on the 26th of September, 1653. The act that was passed was breathtaking in its intent. Before May 1st of 1654, all members of the Irish nation were to remove themselves west of the River Shannon into the area of County Clare and the province of Connaught, the poorest and most inhospitable region in the island where famine was still raging. The choice was to hell or Connaught. So that's just kind of the basic thing. So then what I need to do is, I'm starting with the play, but then I need to understand all of the references that she makes, and I have to understand the broader context. So some of the things that I'm going to need to research to really understand deeply is things such as the environment, the politics, the worldview, the religion, the clothing, the language. Now, some of the things that I'm going to research and some of the information I'm going to find is not going to be anything that necessarily even the actors are going to care about or know, or the audience. Like, for example, does anyone care that Oliver Cromwell was the third signature on the order to behead Charles? Not that important, but I do know now that he was the third signature on Charles' death certificate, okay? So not anything anybody's probably going to know, but I know it now. Okay, so the first thing is environment, okay? Where's it set? So it's set in Ireland. It's during Cromwell. It's in the 17th century. And so I've got to find some specifics. It's set in County Kildare. So where is County Kildare? County Kildare is actually in the west. When I was connecting with a person who I met with about the Gaelic, he was like, well, I'm from the north, and I think this is probably set in the west. So I'm like, well, not that many people know Gaelic, so I think we're okay. I said, I just want to make sure that it isn't Scottish Gaelic. I want to make sure that it's not a poor American version of Gaelic. I would just like it to be Gaelic from Ireland. So, so there's things that I need to find out. So environment, things like that. And I'm just going to give you little highlights because I could sit here for days and tell you all the information that may or may not ever see the light of day. But just so you know. So set in Ireland, that's my environment. And it's basically two estates that are bordering each other. Okay, we do go into the governor's office. We do go to the commission when they have to appeal and different things. But basically, it's in two estates. And then Rick and I have to talk about, okay, how are we going to actually show the environment? Now we're doing shows in rep. We're doing two shows at the same time, and we have different needs. So we're doing what's called a suggested set. So what we're going to do is we're suggesting the house, we're suggesting with very simple things, okay? And it's a unit set. A unit set is one set that stays, and we just kind of bring things on and off. And that allows me to quickly move from these different locales, because my play is set up with a lot of different locales that move kind of quickly. And so I'm also going to use music to kind of segue between, because it's very relational, it's very atmospheric, it's got very specific moods and emotions, and so I want to do that with the sound design as well. So that's part of that process, just figuring out what's going to be the environment, okay? Then politics. In this case, I really have to understand what the political situation is, okay? We have Cromwell in charge. He has basically created his own army, okay? Basically, the Puritans were feeling like the Parliament was not doing what they were supposed to be doing, so they should take care of that, and that's what they did. They fought against the king. So you've got people in Ireland. One of the characters in my show is an Englishman, but he supports the king. So he fights for the Confederacy, he fights for the king, and now this is causing him problems because he's now considered an enemy. So I have to understand what he was going for. He says that, well, that's a king is divinely, appointed. So of course I don't have a choice. I have to fight for this. And the people of Cromwell are saying, no, we're divinely appointed. So the whole religion thing becomes a very big sticking point and everything. And so I really have to kind of almost go back to what was happening with England and Ireland, even before that, to kind of understand the push and pull of the Protestants and the Catholics. That becomes a very big push and pull. Okay, so Charles has been beheaded. Cromwell is now the Lord Protectorate. He keeps sending his sons to Ireland to kind of take over. And so now there's all these people in Ireland, and basically they've just had this war, and people have not been paid. And so they're like, well, what can we do? We don't have any money to pay them. Oh, let's give them land. So basically they decide, well, we'll just pay them by giving them all this land in Ireland. And guess what? If we take the people from Ireland and ship them to the Indies and sell them as indentured service, we can make a tidy little profit. So that's what they do. So basically, it's a financial situation, it's a monetary situation, it's a political, it's religious. There's just a lot of different reasons for why they're doing it. And it also becomes something that says a lot about Cromwell as a person. I'm just going to read a tiny little bit about Cromwell and his politics and his religion, because I just think it's a little interesting here. Okay, and I'll put my glasses back. Okay, Cromwell was a Puritan. Okay, he was a highly religious man who believed that everybody should lead their lives according to what was written in the Bible. The word Puritan means followers had a pure soul and lived a good life. Cromwell believed that everybody else in England should follow his example. So when you hear about what his ideas are, they sound like, well, that's a really Christian thing. We should follow that. But the problem becomes he decides what that is and what that means, and if you don't follow what I believe, then you're wrong. And Rick and I were talking about this, the whole idea of lots of times it's religious motives that are doing this, but it's not Christ-like. It's not Christ's example. It's like the Catholic and the Protestant, they're both fighting and saying God is on our side and everything, but no one is really going, well, what happened to the verse about love your neighbors? What happened to the verse about, we all have worth? Those kind of things, that becomes something to kind of grapple with, both hopefully for our audience, but for our cast as well. So these are some of the examples of just some of the things that Puritans did, as far as like, this is how you have to do things. One of the main beliefs of Puritans was that if you worked hard, you would get to heaven. Pointless enjoyment was frowned upon. Cromwell shut many inns, and all the theaters were closed. Okay? In England at this time, between 1649 and 1660, all the theaters were closed down. In fact, at 1660, when Charles II was brought back to England, because Cromwell had died and his son couldn't really keep things going, that time historically in theater is called the Restoration, because theaters were restored. And then they become very much like French theaters, because Charles spent his little time away in France in the court of Louis. So there's all of a sudden England looks completely different than it did before. So theaters were closed. Let's see. Boys caught playing football on Sunday could be whipped as punishment. Swearing was punished by a fine. Those who kept swearing could be sent to prison. Sunday became a special day under the Puritans. Most forms of work were banned. Women caught doing unnecessary work on a holy day could be put in the stocks. Simply going for a Sunday walk, unless it was to church, could lead to a hefty fine. So that was kind of what was going on. And this was enforced by Cromwell's law, which was enforced by his use of soldiers. His New Model Army is what it was called. And so that was kind of the situation that they were going. And then he also, even though he's saying it's all about God and living correctly and everything, he really has a strong dislike for Irish Catholics. Despite all these rules, Cromwell himself was not strict. I always find this very interesting. They want everybody else to be strict, but he was not. He enjoyed music, hunting, and playing bowls. He even allowed full-scale entertainment at his daughter's wedding. So, do as I say, not as I do. Despite being a highly religious man, Cromwell had a hatred for the Irish Catholics. He believed that they were all potential traitors, willing to help any Catholic nation that wanted to attack England. And so, during his time as the head of the government, he made it his task to tame the Irish. He sent an army there, and despite promising to treat well those who surrendered to him, he slaughtered people in Wexford and Drogheda that had already surrendered to his forces. He just destroyed them. And basically used the policy of to hell or con it to just get rid of everybody. So that's some of the background of what's going on just with the politics. So, and obviously there's a lot more, and there's a lot of things that actually come into the script that I have to make sure that I understand. As a director, it becomes really important that I can communicate to my actors as much information as possible so that even though the audience isn't necessarily going to understand everything, I mean, I'll try to do some stuff with a director's note, but they're not going to understand everything. However, if my actors don't understand why that's funny or why that means a certain thing, it becomes really problematic. Like we were talking yesterday about the Anabaptists. And I said, do you know why that line is kind of funny? And they go, yeah, because Anabaptists didn't believe in infant baptism, because they were talking about infant baptism. And they're like, well, if we don't, because the characters had been married in a Catholic church, but another character suggests that for political reasons it might be better to christen the child in a Protestant thing. And so they're talking about that and saying they've got to be careful and everything, and then they go, well, you know, if we're not careful, we'll be accused of being Anabaptist, and they kind of sit there and smile a little bit because, you know, that's another one. So they have to understand the context of that. They also have to understand the worldview, that the fact that kings or leaders are the divine elect. There's no real movement within classes. That women, their place in society. The very beginning of the play, we have the lead character, she's having a baby, and she's, her husband is there. And I said to one of the actors, because he goes, is he with her? And I'm like, okay, stop and think about the time period. Is that a normal occurrence for a husband to be in with his wife when she's having a baby? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess not. And so those kind of things. And then there's even a discussion about that with another character, like, you know, my baby's just, you know, appeared out of nowhere because I was not allowed in there. And she goes, indeed you were not. And Kayla's smiling because that's her line. So really understanding things like marriage. Why did you marry? You marry for duty, not for love. And that's why Robert gets into problems, because he married for love as opposed to duty. And then because how the author frames the conflict, which is a really interesting idea, is she has an Irish woman and an English man, and they get married. And so they're dealing with how do they deal with the situation. And then the other main characters are English people who have been in Ireland for 30 years, but they supported the king, so now they're in jeopardy of losing their home. So understanding the worldview, and there's a lot of different things with that. Religion becomes really important, obviously. The struggle between Catholic and Protestant. Power kept shifting, okay? Nobody's really following Christ's example. It just became this push and pull, you know. It started when they kicked the Pope out and started with the Anglican Church, and then you had some of the kings were, Mary was Catholic and Elizabeth was Protestant. So you have to keep kind of understanding who's in power and just that whole big struggle, okay? Then clothing, Rick and I were talking about that. Problem with the Irish clothing is they kind of wanted to really put the clothing, you know, like didn't want the Irish to be Irish. And there's a reference in the play about the laws of appearance, and this is just a few of the things that they didn't want the Irish to do. So mostly they wanted the Irish to dress like the British. during the reigns of Henry and Elizabeth, the use of saffron, which is a yellow, saffron dye was prohibited. It was believed to be the favorite color of the Irish. The amount of cloth used to make Irish clothes was limited. Long hair and the wearing of mantles, which is kind of like the Scottish things. The Irish have a mantle that's kind of similar to the Scottish one. They're more about the shoulders than across. But they were outlawed. It was believed that these were used to conceal a person's true identity. It was said that the mantle was, quote, a fit house for an outlaw, a meet bed for a rebel, and an apt cloak for a thief. So they, there's one character that the governor says something about his wild hair and his beard, you know. So I have to know what that refers to. I have to make sure that Rick and I talk about that I get somebody that we put a beard on him, or he has wild hair or whatever. I mean, that he has longer hair, those kind of things. So I have to look at all of those things. So the clothing becomes important. And then just as Rick said, how does that translate into the character? The final thing is the language, which for my play is a little bit more extensive because we're dealing with an English-speaking population, but we're dealing with relatively diverse dialects. We've got Standard British, which are the upper class people. We've got Irish. We've got Gaelic. And then there's a sailor character, so he's talking more of a Cockney. One of the reasons I decided to do the play was because I'm teaching dialects. So one of the first things that I did was I made sure that my first week of rehearsals, the Irish people met together so that they could be talking like this, and my English people could meet so they could talk like this. Because when they came together, they can't mix and match, which they still do a little bit, but not very much. So that's one of the things that I had to do. I didn't know how to speak Gaelic, so I had to make sure that I found out how to do that. So I looked it up phonetically, but I'm very auditory. So I found somebody at the Irish Music Center who could pronounce the Gaelic for me. He was also a musician, and we have a lullaby in Gaelic. So he knew the original, and then the words that were in the script, he said those were created by the playwright. But he sang those for us, so now my actress has those. So those are some of the things that I have to look at. So that's just the beginning process to take all of this. The next example is then to take all of this stuff that I'm learning and understanding and working with, and then putting it, rather than into a paper or a case study or anything, putting it into a production. So now I have to take all of that information and all that work and everything and connect it to the actors. And so so sometimes I'll do things like bring examples in just to help them understand something. Like when we were doing the read-through, there was a line about, will she be Barbados? And they were like, that's a verb. And I was like, good, you guys, you saw that it was a verb. And it's true, it is a verb. And so it seems like it's incorrect. Well, I looked that up, and on March 11th in 1655, Thomas Carlyle wrote, this is a quote, "A terrible protector this. He dislikes shedding blood, but is very apt to Barbados, an unruly man. He sent and sends us by the hundreds to Barbados, so that we have made an active verb of it, Barbados you." So at the time period, it became a verb because it was done so often. So I try to do that to help the actors. The other things that I'm going to work with is how they move, how they stand, okay? Poor Erin knows this because I keep going, you can't sit like that, okay? They're used to sitting up and down. They've been trained on riding a horse, how they stand. One of my actors has taken the theatrical styles class, and I said, I can tell who's taking theatrical styles because she knows how to sit and stand, and some people that haven't taken that class yet. So you have to train them in that. You have to talk about things like how their relationships might be impacted. You have to then work with the lights, the costumes, all those kind of things. And that's where the research that you've done, that you're connecting with now, is translated to your actors. And hopefully the more that they can understand their time period, why things are being done the way that they're being done, the more that can then become a representation to the audience. Because what we're trying to do is get the audience to kind of connect with the truths, the ideas, to get them thinking. And this play, just sort of like Rick's play, it gets you thinking. It doesn't say, here's the solution. It just says, this has been happening. And I think as believers, one of the things that just strikes me is like, we have to stop doing this. We're continually doing this idea of ethnic cleansing, and just, if we just look at them as lower class, or if we look at them, one of the lines that Kayla's character has is the one about animals, that we pray together. Can you say that line for me?
We would kneel and worship in the same church, and yet they look at us and see no more than animals.
Yes, so that we want the audience to kind of think about, how do we look at other people? How do we look at the other? That's not what we're called to as believers. We're called to see everybody as having value. And when you see a story like this, it just reminds us we have to stop going there, and we need to make choices that are going to draw us more into his example. I probably need to stop now. I could talk on and on, but I won't. Thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, grab Rick or I, and please let people know about the show. I think they're both going to be really exciting, and you'll learn a lot, and they will be entertaining as well. Thanks. Bye.